Coming up next, why the man called Abram was called a friend of God.
And I'll be looking for the name of a king.
And we're going to be exploring a city that Abraham lived in.
All that and more on Quick Study. Stay there. It's about to begin. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's Quick Study, and I'm Rod Hembree.
I'm Janice.
And I'm Corie.
And we are continuing to go through the Bible in 1 year. As we do that, we start to move from God dealing with nations and one specific man to another very specific man and to many nations. Now, this is an interesting time in the Bible. Today, we will be studying, if you follow along in your Quick Study Pocket Guide, Genesis chapter 12 through 14, where the man called Abram, later to be called Abraham, is called out by God, and he encounters many people along the way. A very interesting theme that we can learn personal lessons from. Corie?
We are going to be exploring ancient Haran, a city where Abraham spent some time, and we're also going to take a look at some ancient documents that help establish the culture that Abram would have been a part of.
Very interesting. Bible IQ question is what?
In the days when Amraphel was the king of Shinar, who was the king of Sodom? Tidal, Bera, or Shinab?
Oh, my goodness. Listen to the complications of those names. All right. Well, and actually, Tidal was actually a name,
Yes.
not a title.
That's right.
Very interesting. Now-
Tidal, T-I-D-A-L.
Exactly. But it's interesting because, you know, names mean something, and
They
maybe
do.
we'll talk about that. Also, later on, we have a segment together where we'll be minding the truth and discussing what we've learned. Now let's study on. The Bible has been and continues to be the most popular book in all of human history. But the English translation of the Bible is very recent. The first full English translation of the 66 books of the Bible was the Coverdale Bible, translated in 1535 by scholar Miles Coverdale. The effort was dedicated to Anil Bolian, one of King Henry's 8 wives.
We are still in Genesis today, and we are at a part in Genesis where it begins to talk about the father of the Hebrew nation, Abram, who is later to be called Abraham. God changes his name a little bit later on in the story. But Abram is just a man living in the city of Ur, and he is called out of Ur. And he and his father and his nephew and his wife, they leave Ur and they stop at a city, possibly because Abram's father is ill. They stop at a city named Haran. Now, they possibly left Ur of the Chaldees not only because God called them out, but there was a lot of political turmoil, or at least there's evidence of that when we look at the ancient literature. There was a lot of political turmoil going on, so it was actually a good thing that Abram and Terah left. So what you and I are going to take a look at right now is the city of Haran. We want to know where that is, what the economy was like, what it was like socially for Abram. So we're a little bit limited by time. We have to interpret history as we go in and we dig it up. But take a look at this. I think you'll like it. The original home of the patriarch Abraham was a place called Ur of the Chaldeans in Genesis 11. Abraham and his father set out originally from Ur to go to the land of Canaan, but something changes on the way, possibly the health of Abraham's father, and they come to rest in a place called Haran. History points to a thriving, bustling, urban center of Haran at this time of Abraham. An important religious center dedicated to the moon god, an important commercial center, a wealth of early culture, economy, and technology. Later on in his life, Abraham continues on to Canaan. But Haran's involvement is far from over. Some of Abraham's relatives remain in the city or the region of Haran. Isaac's wife comes from Haran, as does Jacob's. In fact, at the urging of his mother, Jacob travels to Haran and spends many years there working for his wives. Here in Haran is where Jacob has 11 of his sons.
Our study, Genesis 12 to 14, let's put it in context with truth text. Genesis 12 is the origin of the covenant with Abraham. And this amazing call is filled with the character of God's sovereign power. Chapter 13 brings Abram into the land in which God's kings would live and die. It is the place where God would put his temple and the new millennial temple thousands of years after Abraham lived. Chapter 14 shows of the elevation of Abram into a world leader, becoming a beacon of God's rescue purpose.
Genesis 12, verses 1 through 9. Now the Lord had said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. Then Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. So they came to the land of Canaan. Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your descendants I will give this land." And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. So Abram journeyed, going on still toward the south. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 9.
We touched on it yesterday, but we're going to continue talking about it today. The action of building an altar to the gods was no rare thing in the day of Abram. After all, God himself had instituted sacrifice in the Garden of Eden at the fall of man, according to Genesis chapter 3. But you know, building an altar to a different god in a strange land was a violation of spiritual cultural code. Now, the first altar Abram built to the one true God is in Genesis chapter 12. It was the beginning of a reclaim to the very land that God himself had created for himself. And do you know, it started a spiritual war that continues even till today. I believe that that's why we have such difficulty in the Middle East. There is a spiritual root, which is a spiritual war. And that's actually what James chapter 4 talks about in the New Testament of the Bible, confirming what we're talking about. Now today, as we look at Genesis chapter 12, we are learning about God, and Abraham is being discipled by the Creator. And in doing so, you and I, can learn so much about God and how to conduct our lives if we would listen to this discipleship training that is coming to Abraham from the great I Am. I want to begin with our first truth to live by. Here it is. The successful call of God is never about the skill of a man or the talents of a man or a woman. It is about their obedience. I love this because it simply means that we are not determined, our success of following God is not determined by our skill or by our talent. It is determined rather by our obedience. Will we follow God? Now in chapter 12 it says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country, your kindred, your father's house, your father's land, and I will show you a new place. Go there." You know, I want to say something because there are some great friends of mine at Church on the Street down in Phoenix, Arizona. And every single one of them, they watch this program for part of the treatment, and every single one of them, my good friends down there, you know I'm talking to you, every single one of you have been called out from where you were to where you're going. And God is now showing you new land that He's promised you, drug-free, alcohol-free, obsession-free, new land. And God will reward your obedience, my beloved friends. God will award your obedience. He will reward you with great blessing and spiritual ability. Stay in there. Stay on the track. Stay focused on God. And this is what we realize, that regardless of our talent or our abilities, our intellectual skills, our academic prowess, none of that matters when the call of God is instituted. It only matters that we obey Him. And He, beloved, will make us the men and the women He has called us to be. Truth to live by, number 2, as we look at Genesis 12, the presence of those who hate God never ever stops the power and the purpose of God's call. Now in verse 5 it says, Abram took Sarah his wife and Lot's brother's son and all their possessions that they had gathered and all the people that they had acquired in Haran, and they set out to the land of Canaan, where they came to the land of the Canaanites. Now Abram would be all completely surrounded by people who did not appreciate the one true God. No, they didn't. But Abram did not stop. He did not stop at the first sign of resistance. He did not stop because people didn't like him. He went forward and obeyed the living God. As we go forward, as we continue to do what we know God has told us to do, that is a determined decision. Not to listen to the peers around us, not to listen to everybody. You know, everybody wants to be liked. But when we want to love God, and when He becomes our most important person not to offend, then we get somewhere in life. People are not going to understand our call to moral obedience that the Bible brings to us as a challenge, our call to faithfulness to God, our call to treat our enemies with love, our call to treat our neighbors as ourselves. People are not going to understand that in this dog-eat-dog world, this so-called survival of the fittest world. But we don't listen to the societies. We listen to God, beloved, to His Word, who tells us this way, and God will reward us. This is part of why God brought Abraham into covenant. Finally, truth to live by, number 3. We must always focus on God's call and His purpose for us, not on the trouble that surrounds us. We must always focus on God's call and His purpose for us, not on the circumstances that surround us. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. Verse 7, I will give this land to you. And so he built an altar to the Lord. Man, he looked around and what did he leave for? I mean, he left for a bunch of desert space. He could have been living so comfortably back in Haran, but no, Abraham didn't focus on that. Abraham focused on the promise of God and the obedience of God. And I want to tell you something. This is the most common known character in the world even today, Abraham. And we know him for his promise, for his covenant Very, very interesting. Stay faithful to God and don't worry about the circumstances. Strange but true. Places, people. Ancient scribes record amazing truth. Ancient scribes record amazing truth. The word dragon is used 21 times in the Old Testament of the Bible. But if you replace the word dragon with dinosaur, in most instances it fits nicely. For example, in Jeremiah 14:6 it says, "They snuffed up the wind like dragons." In Malachi 1:3 it says, "The dragons of the wilderness." Many scientists believe that dinosaurs were called dragons before the word dinosaur was ever first used and invented in 1841. The word dinosaur is a recent invention of man's idea. But the biblical concept of dinosaurs is evident all the way back to Genesis 1.
Today, when we read the historical record of Genesis, we are at a little bit of a disadvantage culturally. Because we are so far removed from that time period in history, so much has happened, our culture has changed so much that it's often difficult to understand some of the ins and outs of what happens in Genesis. Well, one way that we try to bridge this gap is by taking a look at ancient documents. In 1964, excavations at Tel Marduk, the ancient powerhouse city of Ebla, began. Dating from the time of Abraham and before, this city's influence spread far and wide. Ebla's massive library of written legal documents, histories, and lists forces us to admit several crucial points. First and foremost, we now know that as far back as the 3rd millennium BC, societies had complex government and legal systems, and they kept detailed written records. This supports the Bible's claim of its early books being family genealogies, histories, finally compiled and edited by Moses later in history. The capability and cultural probability is there. The Ebla tablets create for us a cultural backdrop on which we can compare the Old Testament accounts of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Findings, including specific laws and the naming of the 5 cities of the plain found in Genesis 14, have added credibility to the historical accuracy of the Old Testament. Another interesting discovery has been that of the Ebla creation story. It is the earliest non-biblical account, and it's strikingly similar to Genesis. Monotheistic. One God created everything from nothing. This is fascinating. It refutes the once popular assumption that monotheism, belief in one God, was born out of polytheism, belief in many gods.
Keep learning and add to your faith knowledge with I Hear Radio at www.BibleDiscoveryTV.com. Dr. Chuck Misler, Rabbi Zacharias, Adrian Rogers, Chuck Thurston, Quick Study Radio, Charles Swindell, Alistair Begg, and much more are available to explore the Bible with you every day. Go to BibleDiscoveryTV.com, follow the links to online radio, and click on I Hear Radio. This is the Quick Study Television.
Thank you for watching Quick Study Television today, and we encourage you to read through the Bible with us. I invite you to pray about supporting Quick Study TV and to write for your own personal Quick Study Pocket Guide. This beautiful color guide will lead you through the Bible in 1 year to help you develop your personal encounters with God. For a gift in any amount, we'll automatically send it to you every month. Write to P.O. Box 150, Murraysville, Pennsylvania, 156680150. Or in Canada, write to P.O. Box 456, Orangeville, Ontario, L9W5G2.
Here's an amazing truth from what we've studied today. Building altars and making sacrifices to the gods was a way of bonding the land that the altar was on to that God. But hundreds of years after Abraham, Moses would be commanded by God to make but one altar in one tabernacle. And sacrifices were to be confined to one place, the tabernacle, where God would bond himself to his people. This was different to the culture of the ancient world and is a sign of the image of the one true God and one way to him. That's a very interesting thing to remember when we focus on, Corie and Janice, some of these ancient customs. Now, you've studied archeology.
Yes.
You've studied many altars. One specific place was Caesarea Philippi. And tell us a little bit about that, because I want to talk about that for a second.
Caesarea Philippi, which one?
The Pan, the one where Pan is worshipped.
Yes. Okay. What do you want me to tell you about it?
What they did there, how they worshipped the god there.
Well, they actually hollowed out a section in the mountain. The temples were built. There was several temples actually built along the side of the mountain, and they would actually in that carved out place of the rock, they would actually burn their sacrifices in there, which included human children as well, and adult people as well.
And the altar was part of the way that the people would assign their loyalty to that particular pagan god, which I believe, and which the Bible calls demonic. And so it's interesting, Noah, now the altar idea was started by God in the Garden of Eden. After, as a result of sin, after Adam and Eve sinned, God clothed them. But meat was not eaten until the time of after Noah. But God saw that all of these pagan altars were being built to the various different gods. And so he calls Abraham out of the land of many gods to worship the one true God. And now we see a reformation of the worship practices, a return, if you would, to the offerings and the altars built to the one true God. And so Abraham builds these altars around the land of Canaan, bonding the land to God. That is very interesting. So anyway, it's a little bit of background information. We'll see how that all plays out.
And how important it is for us to understand the background information, because it's very easy for us to read through the Old Testament and miss so much in something that seems to be a very small detail, but once you understand the culture and the times, it completely changes the complexity of what you're reading, and all of a sudden it makes total sense.
That is, in fact, the point of minding knowledge.
There
That's why we're here. Bible IQ question. Then I want Janice to bring us our meditation passage today. Now, here's the Bible IQ question, ladies and gentlemen.
In the days when Amraphel was the king of Shinar, who was the king of Sodom? Was his name Tidal? Was his name Bera? Or was his name Shinab?
Corey's giving me the look. So Corie doesn't want to answer this question. Nobody on the crew wants to answer this question. What do you think, Corie? Give me your best guess, and then I'll decide whether I agree with it.
I would guess number 2.
You are right. Bera.
Bera.
Thank you.
Bera. B-E-R-A. Yes.
Is it Bera?
Bera. Genesis 14, verse 2.
Woohoo!
King of Sodom.
King of Sodom.
All right. Well, you know, the king of Sodom didn't have his heart right because he tried to make deals with Abraham later on, but
Yep.
that was a different story for a different day. Very interesting. Now, as we go through the Bible, we have various passages we want to think on and meditate on, not just, you know, go through it quickly and just see it and read it. Like we don't read the Bible like the newspaper. We read the Bible as if it's a truth. What is today's minding knowledge scripture?
It comes from Genesis 12, verse 8, and he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel. Of course, we're talking about Abraham. And he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. There he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord.
Now, you know what's interesting about this? This, of course, is the Bethel, of course, is ancient Luz, L-U-Z.
Yep.
All right? But the writer of this historical passage uses the term they would know, Bethel. Okay?
Yes.
Bethel means the house of God.
House of God.
In the land, when Joshua comes into the land and conquers it, this becomes very significant because of how God has them conquer the land. It's very interesting. Hey, I just want to, in the concluding moments, remind you we're on Facebook and we're on YouTube with videos. We want you to check it out. To find out how you can follow us, you go to the streamtv.com or the website. You'll notice is always on the top now, BibleDiscoveryTV.com, where we have a lot of good things. We do watch and pray. You bring in the request. We want to pray for you. Please, when you write to us, send us your prayer request. It's very important to us. We believe in the power of prayer. Last year, you heard that. You read our hearts from that. What you're about to see is a culmination of people who've asked all the Quick Study viewers to stand with them in agreement in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ and pray for their needs. So here's Watch and Pray. Watch, and please pray. The truth is that the purpose in our life that God created us for can only be understood, only be completely recognized as we give our lives and our heart to Him. Now, Paul the Apostle said when he wrote to the church at Rome back in the first century, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, which is holy and acceptable unto the Lord. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. How do you do that? Everybody's conformed to what's around us. Well, that is unless you invite the power of Jesus Christ into your life. When you do so, God gives you a supernatural power. It's above the ability to, or above the tendency to be blended in to the rest of the world. You can become a true original, the original God wanted you to be. But it can only happen if you invite Jesus Christ in your life. How do you do that? Ask Him to be your Lord right now. Pray to Him and say, I believe, Jesus, you are mine. Come into my heart now.